First, we have to understand that if you want to affect something in Latin America, you have to be focused on each country and not in the region.
But generally, they are involved in the very, very important policy of the Russian Federation, which it has embarked upon already as the Soviet Union in the 1920s, meaning using culture for political needs.
First of all, the Russian Federation maintains significant economical influence, including using this difficult situation in different countries by the region, and also resources from the occupied Ukrainian territories.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic Force. And I'm your host, Miroslava Yaremkin. The attitudes of the leaders of Latin American countries towards the Russian invasion of Ukraine are expected to differ, although it is quite difficult to say which factor affects their position more. Russian propaganda, which tries to shape the socio-political discourse around the Ukrainian question, or the financial infusions of the Russian Federation and economic dependencies of the respective countries. However, both factors play a role, and in general, the position of the countries in the region regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war is mostly neutral in terms of providing military aid to Ukraine and imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation. In today's episode, we are going to talk about Russian influence in Latin America, cultural diplomacy, economic ties, diplomatic espionage networks, and playing on anti-American sentiments in the region. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. From a political point of view, it is important for Ukraine to work against Russian propaganda in Latin America for two reasons: the UN and immigration. Firstly, the countries of Latin America are members of international organizations, and countries such as Mexico and Brazil are members of the Security Council, and we need the support of all members of the Security Council. Secondly, a significant proportion of the population in some countries, such as the United States, Germany, France, and Great Britain, consists of immigrants from Latin America. Since political representatives in these states listen to their voters, it is in Ukraine's interest to reduce the amount of Russian propaganda in Spanish-language resources and its corresponding broadcast to Spanish-speaking communities in the West. Marcelo Masalleras, former Chilean Army officer and AthenaLab analyst, will share his advice on how Ukraine should communicate and effectively work with countries in the region.
First of all, you have to understand Latin America is not a community of like-minded countries. It's composed by, it's a region, it's a geographic region with many countries, but with different approaches in many different areas. So in the economic area, we have a very open economies and very centralized economy. It's very different. We have in different countries stayed with the state building process in different levels. So instability used to be a big problem, but it continues to be a problem in the region. We have different strategic views about the world and many other things. So first, we have to understand that if you want to affect something in Latin America, you have to be focused on each country and not in the region as a whole. You will fail. Okay. I'm pretty sure that the logic behind the Russian view is to try to influence, like India said, and the means that they use, of course, are not direct means. I mean, I don't see Mr. Putin talking in the local TV saying that we are the best because nobody will trust him. Okay, so I agree with you both when you say that they do it through third parties like elites, leaders, or artists. But also you have to see the third parties countries. I think in that region, China has more influence than Russia, because like here, Russia is the most important trade partner for the most part of the Latin American countries. And China has been working for decades, trying to influence, trying to invest, the direct invest in Latin America. It's huge. It's huge. And you also have Iran. Iran, in the last probably 15 years, is trying to influence more in the region. Of course, through the same countries. Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, but also Bolivia, who is a border state with us. Iran created new embassies, 8 probably in the last 12 to 15 years. They invested some money creating cultural centers for Islamic purposes. We have to have in mind that when you talk about Iran, you are talking about Hezbollah, Hamas, and other proxies. In the 90s, Hezbollah put bombs in Buenos Aires and killed 100 people. So it's a very sensitive issue in Argentina, but also in Chile. So when you go to South American countries, Latin American countries, you have to be cautious and take this in mind. We are not the same. We share the language and other stuff, but it's different. We have different approach. We have different interests. The political organizations are not the same.
Historical Russophobia is another belief that became important after Western parliaments decided to ban Russian TV channels to curb disinformation. Russian diplomatic and cultural missions and news publications have very actively disseminated messages about the oppression of Russian-speaking residents abroad and the destruction of Russian culture. They emphasize that the ban on Russian media deprives viewers in the West and Latin America of the opportunity to hear their versions of events. Nadia Koval, head of the Department of Analytical Research and Academic Programs at the Ukrainian Institute, will talk more about Russia using soft power and cultural diplomacy to spread beneficial narratives in the region.
We have almost no Ukrainian studies departments in Africa and Middle East and most of Asia. So if you look at the maps one again, everything is concentrated in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Central Europe, and a bit in China and Japan and Australia, and that's it. And when you do not have this rigorous institutional presence of verified knowledge about the region, so it's not only Ukraine, it's generally the question of the knowledge about Central and Eastern European region, you can you start to rely on Russian studies as a sort of truth, as a sort of framework of explaining its region, its history, its past, its politics, and everything. And besides doing this Ukraine-centered research, we, in 2022, shifted to Russia-centered research. And we did quite a huge research on the Russian cultural diplomacy institutions. So it was institution-centered research on 3 most important institutions like Россотрудничество, Rусский Мир Foundation, and Gorchakov Fund, which are responsible for part of activities that Ivan has mentioned, starting with youth exchanges and other cultural activities. But generally, they are involved in the very, very important policy of the Russian Federation, which it has embarked upon already as a Soviet Union in the 1920s. Meaning using culture for political needs. So since the 1920s, culture is very heavily instrumentalized in Russia in a few dimensions. First, for normalization of relations. In 1920s, it was the need to reestablish the Soviet Union on the international stage as a normal actor, yes, to get it recognized. So they started sending writers, intellectual journalists, artists from the Soviet Union to the countries of Western Europe and bringing them back just to show it's just a normal country. Like we can establish dialogue on culture, we can share our great cultures with all together, and then on the basis of this, we could build quite successful bilateral relations, and it paid because in the 1930s, they have reestablished these relations and actually and actually before the Second World War broke out, actually the Soviet Union has been well recognized. It was one of the factors, not the most important one though. In the times of the Cold Wars, creating societies and friendships and educational exchanges with the countries all over the world has served the Soviet Union to actually build alliances. Very political aim of building alliances through strengthening these cultural connections, developmental aid providing, sending engineers in different countries for some infrastructural projects and so on and so forth. Then after the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian side, not immediately, mostly after the color revolutions on the beginning of 2000, they concentrated pretty much on reconquering what they have lost, on a revanchist policy that we need to get actually these territories back. They belong to so-called Russian world, and either culturally, politically, through soft power, or finally after 2014 they started to use hard power, military aggression, but it is always supported by this soft power, by the ideology.
Russian narratives echo the pains of Latin America. The strained relations with the USA, the attempt to get out of its shadow, and the desire to build an international system in which the role of the USA and other former colonial states is limited prompt the search for alternatives. When it comes to Latin America, Russia tends to tone down its imperialist tone and highlight the hypocrisy of Western powers and recall the darkest episodes of their relationship with the United States. In this way, Russia manipulates public opinion in Latin America to its advantage. Ivan Fechko, expert of the Latin American and Caribbean research program of the Ukrainian Prisma Foreign Policy Council, will elaborate on the wide Russian influence on the region.
The Russian Federation exerts a wide influence on the countries of Latin America, which it helps to spread the relevant false narratives and also prevent the actions of Ukraine to gain the support from Latin American countries. And in general, we can divide Latin American countries into three groups, depending on how they react to Russian aggression. The first one are the countries who support Russia. In general, these are countries with authoritarian regimes like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. The second one is countries who formally supported Ukraine, formally condemned Russian aggression, but they did not do anything else, and they continue to have different relations with Russian Federation. And the second group are the countries who support Ukraine and join different Ukrainian initiatives. Nevertheless, the Russian Federation exerts a large influence on all of these countries. Thanks, first of all, to its large resources, bribes, and also espionage networks. First of all, the Russian Federation maintains significant economical influence, including using this difficult situation in different countries by the region, and also resources from the occupied Ukrainian territories. For example, recently, it became known that for the first time, the Ukrainian grain from occupied territory by Russia were stolen and sold to Venezuela regime. And it's about 27,000 tons. And trading Ukrainian grain, for example, Russians do at least two goals for themselves. First of all, they extend this influence over the crisis situation in Venezuela, and also they help their ally, authoritarian President Maduro. Also, in addition to this, Russia continues to invest heavily in Latin American countries. Despite the situation with Western sanctions, they continue to diversify its economy and strengthening the influence in the region. For example, in Brazil, in the beginning of this year, they invested about $1 billion to open a really big plant, Eurochem plant. During the official ceremony of opening this plant, we were present, for example, President Lula, different representatives of Brazilian government, political elite, and it is just one case that shows us that Russia continued to spread different economical influence in this region, especially in countries like Brazil. In addition to economic leverage, Russia also exerts influence through its embassies. As we know, Russia inherited from Soviet Union, very big embassies in different countries, which are in 10 times bigger than, for example, Ukrainians. And it's also known that in this embassy work different spies from Russian government, and also Russian ambassadors during different interviews. They mouthpieces of Russian propaganda with access to the leading media on the region. We can just take one example. For example, Russian ambassador to Brazil in the last year, 2023, mentioned the so-called denazification policy about 200 times in his interview, trying to prove to explain what Russians do with this war in Ukraine.
You've been watching a special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!